Hi everyone! Today I've got another process video showing a fun design using 6x6 paper pads. This video and layout is actually a year in the making. I started it last November and it got set aside because time just didn't allow for me to finish it right at that moment. And I almost forgot about it, but I stumbled across the video I had filmed and thought this would be the perfect time to go ahead and finish it. And I'm so glad to be able to do that because it's such a fun design. Using and backing large cut file designs with 6x6 papers is a great way to utilize the smaller patterns on those papers. With those cut files that have lots of small spaces and detail, these smaller papers are absolutely perfect. With the larger ones, like this pumpkin, even though the 6x6 papers are not large enough to fill a single space, there are ways around that. You can create a pattern by grouping smaller pieces together to fill that larger space. Or in the case of my layout, I used punched hexagons. To begin, I used my 1-inch Fiskars hexagon punch to punch out lots of hexagons from 5 different pattern papers. And this hexagon punch is one of my all-time favorite punches ever, along with the 2 other larger sizes from this brand as well. I love hexagons, so these punches get used a lot. After I punched out the hexagons, I decided to sand the edges of each one to expose that white core of the paper to help define the edges. My plan is to group each color together, and this will really make that hexagon design stand out. I used a nail file for this, or you can use sandpaper. Another option would be to use ink or paint to edge each piece. Usually when I would back a cut file, I would adhere the paper to the back side of the cutout. But for this, because I'm using a bunch of small pieces grouped together, that wasn't an option. So instead, I'm using the cutout pieces that fill the inside of the pumpkin as a base. The first thing I am doing is placing those cutout pieces inside the cut file and then using my ruler to find the center. Anytime I'm covering something like this in smaller shapes, I like to start in the center and work my way out. This way everything is centered on those base pieces. I tend to focus in on details like that because I am a complete weirdo about spacing and whatnot, but you definitely don't have to be this careful with covering these if that's not your thing. So after I have the first hexagon placed, I just start filling in the rest with the goal to completely cover that base piece. At first, I wasn't sure how I wanted to arrange the plaid pieces, but eventually I got it figured out. And a little tip, instead of adding adhesive to each individual piece like I was doing in the beginning, it's a lot easier and faster to just cover the base piece with adhesive, and then all you have to do is stick them down. I started cutting off the pieces hanging over the edges before I had the whole piece covered so that I could use those scrap pieces to fill in the smaller spaces on that base. And that's just an easy way to make sure you have enough pieces and you don't have to punch or sand any extras. After that first one is done, I repeat the same process on the 4 remaining base pieces. I chose to use the same pattern together in each section so that you really see those individual sections of the pumpkin design. I really wanted to focus on the common fall colors, the rusty red, the orange, the brown, and yellow. So picking those 3 papers was a no-brainer. The other 2 sections, I decided to go with the blue because it was such a pretty accent to the fall colors. And then for the last paper, I tried to pick one that had a mix of all of those colors. That white plaid design had a nice combination of all the colors I used, and I thought it was a nice way to tie it all together. Now, with all of the base pieces covered, I can start putting this layout together. I start by adhering the pumpkin outline piece first, and I tried to center it as best as I could, but because it's an imperfect shape, I didn't stress about it too much. Next, I started adhering those hexagon covered base pieces inside the outline. I was a little worried that they wouldn't fit perfectly after being covered with the hexagon, but they did. And a little tip, if they don't for you, you can always sand the edges of the base piece just a little bit until it does fit. I always love adding little leaf and vine clusters near the stem of a pumpkin. It's a great way to add lots of detail to the pumpkin design, so that's always a go-to for me. I used a mix of die cut pieces and some leaf stickers. And for right now, I'm just going to add a base layer that is slightly tucked under the pumpkin. I wanted to add some stitching, so it's easier to add those pieces first, and then I'll fill in with some dimensional pieces later. I really wanted to add a thick stitched detail around the pumpkin outline, so I started piercing the holes in the center of that outline piece. And I think I was so excited to finally finish this project and do some stitching, and I forgot that it would be easier to add my photos first, so I didn't need to pierce holes in that area. But I remembered eventually and got those added. Usually I start my stitching from a pencil line, but for this I am freehand piercing. I feel like it's easier to do that with this outline and stay in the middle throughout. If you are new to stitching and struggle with accuracy when piercing, you might go ahead and lightly sketch a pencil line in the middle of the outline just to help serve as a guide for your piercing. I decided to use a tan embroidery floss to match the tan outline of the pumpkin. I wanted this to simply add some texture and dimension to that outline. I used all 6 strands of embroidery floss and stitched using a chain link stitch. I absolutely love the thickness and detail in this stitch, and it was perfect for what I wanted to achieve with this outline. With a chain link stitch, you go up a hole and then slide your needle under the previous stitch and then loop back down the hole you came up, and you just keep repeating that. It's such a beautiful, thick, detailed stitch. If you've never done it before, I have a video tutorial that I'll link to down below that you can go check out and see a little more in depth of how to do that. With the stitching done, next I'm going to start filling out the cluster at the top of the pumpkin. I mostly used leaf stickers, and then I accented with some phrase stickers. So next I add my title and then more leaves around that title and the bottom edge of my photos. I thought this was a good tie-in to the leaf cluster at the top of the pumpkin. I also added some phrase stickers near my title and photos. The very last detail I have to add is my journaling. I chose to go with journaling strips. They are always my preferred journaling style, and I adhere them with foam adhesive. I almost always adhere them with foam adhesive to make sure that story is visible and grabbing attention. And that completes this layout. I think I can actually say that this layout was the longest process it's ever taken for me to complete, but only because it got lost in the busyness of the holiday season last year. All in all, aside from the sanding of the hexagons, this really didn't take too much time to create. One of the things I appreciate about this design is thinking of the possibilities with these large cut file designs and pairing them with 6x6 inch papers. Using those smaller papers makes you think a little outside of the box and opens doors for so many unique ideas. For example, with this concept of using smaller pieces grouped together to fill in a cut file outline, there are so many ways you can adapt and customize this to so many different cut file designs. To cover the base and fill in those middle areas, you could use strips, squares, diamonds, triangles, circles, flowers, really the list can go on and on. And there are so many amazing cut file designs out there that you could use with this idea. I know it's a concept that I'm definitely going to be using again. And if you would like to start using 6x6 papers and you don't know where to start, or maybe you like using sketches, I have added several new sketch bundles at scrapbookgeneration.com that are specifically intended to be used with 6x6 papers. You could also use them with scraps too, or just your regular papers. But I will be linking to all of those new ones down below in the video description. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.